Yeah, one of the advantages of being old, hell, the only advantage of being old, is it gives you a little time to develop perspective. And I know we're here to talk about testing tonight, and I will briefly, but I just want to take a minute to provide some context. 33 years ago, before most of you were born, the rest of you were pretty small, the federal government released a report called A Nation at Risk, 1983. And it made headlines, stunning, shocking headlines all over the world. And it said that our public schools were being inundated by a rising tide of mediocrity. It said that if the conditions that our schools were under had been imposed by a foreign nation, we would consider it an act of war. These were very alarming headlines, and they called attention to the fact that the public schools were sinking, failing. There was a response to this. Within months, every state in the union had a blue ribbon commission trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And one of the things that the commission said, the report said, was that the reason for this failure was that students and teachers just weren't working hard enough. They said, history is not kind to idlers. So when the word spread and the states formed their commissions, our wise leaders, politicians, prominent educators, philanthropists, business leaders, reached the conclusion that the way to solve this problem was to get tough. Just get tough, make everybody work a little harder. And so they formulated a strategy for how to improve student achievement, how to get better schools. And it was called standards-based accountability. It was a strategy that had three basic components. The first one was standards. They would tell every student what he or she should know in every grade, in virtually every subject, for 12 years. How's that for arrogance? The second component was a very rigorous curriculum. Students would sit in classrooms for 5 or 6 15-minute classes while teachers crammed their heads full of all the accumulated knowledge of mankind. How's that for hoopers? And the third component was continuous standardized testing, so we could assess the performance of students, teachers, and schools. Apparently, the people who control public education decided that most American children were either too lazy or too stupid to learn, and most American teachers were either too lazy or too incompetent to teach. And so they decided to make education all about standards and assessment. There are a lot of things wrong with standardized testing. It's moral, immoral, it's destructive, it harms children, and most of all, it doesn't do any good. They're useless. Let me count the ways. These tests aren't effective ways to assess students. They don't really measure whether students can think or reason, whether they're creative. What it measures to some degree is short-term memory. You may recall that several months ago, because students were raising hell, they kind of intimidated the legislature and some business people to take the NECAP, just to see how they would do on it. And 60% of them didn't make it. I just happened to be with 2 or 3 of these legislators a few days after the story came out, and I said, you guys have no problem with that NECAP, huh? And they said, well, one guy said, I did terrible. I didn't do well at all. The other guy said, I did okay on math. I wasn't good on the English. I expect the kids to be very good. And one of them looked up and said to me, hey, look, I did that 30 years ago. I've forgotten all that stuff. You know, if you took it 30 years ago and it didn't make any difference and it didn't stay with you and you forgot it, why in the hell did you waste all your time studying or getting it or sitting in those classes taking it? So standardized tests don't really measure whether kids are learning. In fact, brain research and other research recently demonstrates that children learn best when they connect what they already know with something they're trying to learn. That's when they really put it together. They synthesize it. That's completely ignored by standardized tests. In fact, standardized tests actually impede learning because they force teachers to teach to the curriculum. They really narrow the curriculum. As you know right now, Rhode Island is offering all kinds of test prep programs, and kids are staying after school. Teachers are drilled and skilled and practice and all the rest of it, diverting attention away from history and geography and literature and things that might be at least partially interesting to students. So instead you sit there and you try to memorize what you can feed back on the NECAP. You know, people who advocate these tests claim that the reason we have to have them is because of the only objective way we have of assessing whether kids are learning. Objective. Well, they're machines for it, and machines don't discriminate. But machines don't decide which questions to ask, and machines don't choose the wording of the questions, and machines don't decide to do with the result, what to do with the results of the test. All those decisions are made by people, and people generally aren't very objective. Tests are often justified on the grounds that they help teachers help students. They're diagnostic. They tell you where the students are weak, where the students are strong. Well, that's baloney. Standardized tests don't do that. By the time the scores come out, most of the kids have moved on, or they're held back and go to some other remedial program. And teachers universally testify in surveys and everything else that they don't really get any help from standardized tests. And most of them resent them and would prefer that they go away because they're really a symbol of distrust, of great distrust. We leave our kids with teachers for 6 or 7 hours a day, but we don't trust those teachers to judge these students and tell us how well they're doing. The only semi-valid justification for standardized tests is they give you a snapshot, an overview of how the system is doing at any given period of time. But what's the use of an overview or a snapshot if the people who are making the decisions are determined they're going to do what they've been doing and they're going to keep doing it, and they're not going to be influenced by any facts or anybody else's opinion? If your house is cold, and you have one thermometer that says it's 45 degrees, and another thermometer says it's 55 degrees, is your first priority to go out and buy a new thermometer? That's not going to warm up your house any more than tests are going to improve the efficiency or the proficiency of students. They don't contribute anything to student learning. Now, there's another reason you might consider whether we should be doing this. They cost a heck of a lot of money. Two major national organizations, the National Center for Research on Evaluation, Standards, and Student Testing, acronym CREST, and the Center for the Study of Testing, Evaluation, and Educational Policy, which has the acronym CSTEP, estimate the cost of standardized testing. The amount of money spent by standardized testing by the states comes to a mere $22 billion a year. $22 billion a year we spend on tests. We're testing students in virtually every grade now. When NCLB came in 2001, they immediately increased testing in 4 more years, so now they have it all through high school. This was another manifestation of the Get Tough policy. You may recall that during the period of the first few years of End No Child Left Behind, about a third of our schools were just judged as failing, I guess is a simple way to put it, because they weren't showing the kind of progress that this wonderful bill said they would show. Indeed, that bill projected that by the year 2006, every classroom would be staffed by a highly effective teacher, and they had a definition for what that was. Well, the deadline came, the deadline passed, and we're nowhere near achieving that goal. And then they said, and this should cheer up all you students, by the year 2014, that's next year, every student in America is going to be proficient in math and reading. Well, from their lips to God's ear, because it didn't get there. And in Rhode Island, as you know, there are about 4,000 students who are in danger of not getting a diploma next year because they won't score proficiently on the NECAP. Maybe this figure will go down with all the effort that's going into getting these kids ready. So finally, I'd just like to conclude by saying that, you know, it's amazing to me that we haven't really until now, just now we're beginning to see this happen. We're challenging at last a little bit this orgy of standardized testing. We're asking what the rationale is for it. What are the values of it? Why are we doing it? Are we making any progress doing it? And we're not getting answers from the people who are making the decisions about education. Instead of spending billions of dollars and countless hours on standardized testing, these people should be spending their time trying to figure out what the real problem is. And the problem is not that students and teachers are lazy or incompetent. The problem is that the system is badly flawed. It's broken. Every day, every school day, nearly 6,700 kids drop out of school. 6,700, that's 1.2 million kids a year. And the kids with disabilities don't get diplomas and have trouble. Well, the kids who drop out are even lower than that on the economic scale. The people who make these decisions should be made to face the overwhelming evidence that the system isn't working. And there's no point in doubling down yet again, as we're doing with the Common Core and the new tests. More standards, higher standards, tougher curriculum, and more and tougher tests. What we've been doing for 25 years, and it has barely moved the needle in terms of closing the achievement gap or improving student learning. So, I admire you all for being here. I wish this room were filled with 1,000 angry parents and students. Unfortunately, parents tend to get more concerned about whether their driveways get shoveled after a snowstorm than they do about the fact that the schools are failing about 2/3 of their children. Thank you.